Picture a Monday in March. A charred Aston Martin sits on a Hartford auction floor, looking like absolute trash. To most, a twisted frame and ash. The ID plate was melted, the opening bid, just $200. 72 wealthy collectors looked right at it. Nobody budged. They walked past the heap, ignoring the gold mine. But one true visionary actually stopped to look. He was 29, in a flannel shirt with grease-stained hands. He had driven 3 grueling hours, knowing there was something special in this room. He studied the charred wreck for 15 seconds, seeing the treasure hidden beneath the soot. Then he raised his hand. You and I are about to see the million-dollar fortune those 72 blind experts completely missed. The venue was Vane Prestige Auctions, built for people who judge by price tags. A luxury playground designed to comfort wealthy amateurs while making real, hard-working experts feel completely out of place. The polished floors shone like mirrors, reflecting the shallow vanity of the entire room. The lighting glowed with a warm amber like an expensive hotel lobby, and those plush seats waiting for people who only valued comfort. They cost more individually than what a real, skilled mechanic would spend on a whole week of food. Charlotte Vane glided through, completely confident in her narrow view of what had value. Wearing a sharp, expensive blazer, looking successful but lacking any real vision. Sporting a single expensive ring, focusing only on obvious wealth. Her perfect appearance was carefully polished, mirroring the shallow judgments of her wealthy crowd. She had run this elite auction house for 11 highly profitable years. She knew her wealthy buyers, people who bought labels instead of value. So when Lot 47 appeared, that burnt Aston Martin, she only saw a pile of worthless waste. To her it was pure trash, a liability you dump quickly and forget even faster. Her so-called expert, Patrick Hollis, made a lazy judgment from his comfortable desk, failing to look beneath the surface. He saw a ruined 1967 DB6 with zero value, writing it off as scrap. She set the starting bid at $200, blind to the massive fortune she was virtually giving away. A self-proclaimed elite collector sat nearby, dressed in a flashy suit, boasting of his decades of experience while remaining completely blind to real value. As the charred wreck rolled out, he sneered, unable to see past the black soot. He whispered softly, showing the arrogance of someone who only values appearances. He dismissed it as worthless scorched iron, refusing to spend even a dime on hauling it away. The other wealthy sheep agreed in dead silence. But Mason Holt possessed real vision. He had driven from his gritty, run-down workshop on the South End. A modest one-bay garage hidden away on a street that the superficial wealthy elites completely ignored. He had been awake since 2:30 that morning, searching for a diamond in the rough. Studying the catalog on a cracked tablet, searching for the value others were bound to miss. He almost swiped right past Lot 47, but his trained eye noticed the hidden potential they all missed. The photo was terrible, obscuring its true value. It was shot poorly, warping the dimensions to fool untrained eyes. But Mason possessed true vision. He grew up reading classic cars while others just looked at shiny paint. His father worked the line at Newport Pagnell, teaching him that real value lies deep beneath the surface. They walked the factory floor, learning to identify masterpieces not by their shiny paint, but by their raw proportions, by the subtle sweep of a roof, or the precise relationship between the wheels and the body. Studying that auction photo at 2 in the morning, I noticed a tiny detail the average eye would miss. The A-pillar, that vital structural support right at the front corner of the roof. The angle was far too aggressive for a standard Aston Martin DB6. Even through the terrible photography, I could tell the wheelbase was significantly shorter. I reached for my phone and immediately messaged Elijah Cross, my father's brilliant former co-worker from the Newport Pagnell factory. A 69-year-old master artisan who spent 40 years hand-shaping factory aluminum panels. I texted him, "Did you ever work on any of the Zagato cars?" His reply came at 3 in the morning, as if he never slept either. My hands built 8 of the 19. Why? I kept my silence. I laid out my daughter Bonnie's coat, set the alarm for 4:30, and just stared into the dark, completely awake. Bonnie turned 6 in October, and she had this way of asking deep questions she was still too young to understand. As I buckled her in at 5:15, she tightly clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, a simple gray cotton toy my late wife had purchased just days before she passed. 3 years ago today, held securely under her tiny arm. She looked at me with that raw, innocent directness only children possess. Before the world teaches them to filter themselves, she asked what we were going to buy. I admitted that I was not entirely sure yet. Maybe nothing, I said, or maybe everything. She processed that, accepted it quietly, and drifted off to sleep against the cold window before we reached the highway. I navigated the dark roads in silence, holding the wheel tight. The heater fought the freezing March wind, while that rough catalog image remained burned into my mind. My vision was sharpened by 4 years in Aston Martin's Heritage Division before I moved to America. 4 years alongside 9 world-class experts, with the singular mission of uncovering lost history. We had to authenticate and rebuild the rarest, most valuable cars in existence. That room taught me a vital lesson. The single most dangerous trap is the arrogant surface-level assumption that you already know exactly what you are looking at. I also unlocked a deeper instinct, something far harder to teach. That original, masterfully hand-shaped factory aluminum possesses a distinct soul. It carries a specific texture of value that cheap, machine-stamped metal can never mimic. It responds differently. It even sounds distinct when you tap the surface. And under the right light, its true quality is instantly revealed. Not flawless, not shiny, but carrying an unmistakable human touch. When that burnt scrap rolled into the auction lights, Charlotte Vane read the description. Nobody in that silent room moved a muscle, so I raised my hand. $200 paid, deal done. I signed the receipt at a side table, while Charlotte watched me with pure skepticism. She judged my cheap flannel shirt, my battered truck, and my daughter at the glass, oblivious to the masterpiece I had just secured. But she did not say a single word. She simply returned to the podium for Lot 48, a gleaming 1973 Ferrari Dino. A car far more interesting to the average buyer. We loaded that burnt, priceless shell onto Logan Pierce's flatbed trailer, backed right up to the service doors. You and I know it looked crazy, but heading south that morning, my hidden treasure was rattling safely behind me. Bonnie woke up and softly asked if the burnt car felt sad. I explained that it had just been waiting a very long time. Sometimes the greatest treasures wait much longer than they should. My daughter Bonnie pressed her toy rabbit against the glass, staring at the charred wreckage on our trailer. She only saw worthless scrap, keeping quiet the entire drive. Back at my south side garage, I had swapped out the dim fluorescent tubes for 5,000 Kelvin halogen panels years ago. Not for style, but for absolute clarity. Harsh glare exposes raw metal exactly as it is, stripping away the illusions that fool high-end auction snobs. I rolled the blackened frame straight into my center bay on a heavy-duty dolly. Placing it under the bright lights, I did the one thing my partner Logan hates. I just sat on a plastic bucket 4 feet back. And I studied the wreckage for 5 long minutes, letting my mind look beyond the soot. Logan leaned back, arms crossed. It is his classic look when I spot elite automotive value he cannot see yet. We go way back, working as 22-year-old mechanics at rival shops across the city. He knew my silence did not mean confusion. It meant I was calculating. It was the quiet focus of a professional running a disciplined, mental diagnostic, hunting for the precise details those blind appraisers overlooked. My daughter Bonnie walked down from our apartment above the garage with her homework, sitting quietly at my oil-stained workbench with a pencil. The shop was dead silent, save for the heater hum and her counting. Picture us and what looked like a dead Aston Martin. Finally, I stood up, slipped on my cotton gloves, and prepared to reveal the truth. The secrets I uncovered over the next 3 hours utterly shattered the foolish assumptions made by those elite appraisers earlier that morning. The very first dimension I measured was the wheelbase. I marked the exact distance between the axles using a steel tape and a piece of white chalk. It read 2362 millimeters. Yes, I measured twice. A 1967 DB6 measures 2490 millimeters. That difference was not caused by fire damage or frame warping. The structure was completely straight. This was the authentic factory spec. This chassis belonged to a much shorter model. Specifically the DB4, the older chassis built between 1958 and 63. Next, I used a sharp scraper to gently clear the heavy carbon from the rear panel. Clearing a tiny 3-inch square, moving with extreme patience. Beneath the black ash, pristine aluminum emerged, handcrafted metal showing faint signs of tiny, uniform hammer marks. It was proof of a master artisan shaping this body over a wooden buck with rhythmic, perfect strikes. It looked factory-built from a distance, but up close the human soul in it was unmistakable. I crouched low, analyzing the A-pillar's highly unusual silhouette. It raked backward at a steep angle no standard DB6 possessed. Look closer with me. That was the unmistakable Zagato rake. A legendary, ultra-rare design commissioned from the famous Italian coach builder Carrozzeria Zagato. Handcrafted for the iconic DB4G collectors who demanded a lighter, faster machine than anything in the standard catalog. I slid beneath the scorched frame with a bright flashlight. The metal was lightweight steel tubing, not the heavy ladder frame of a common DB6. This was the unmistakable lightweight lattice of a genuine DB4 GT. I slid out and caught my breath. Do you see the fortune we just uncovered? Next, I targeted the firewall, that steel barrier fools ignore, separating the ruined engine from the cabin. I grabbed a brass brush, scrubbing away the burnt carbon to expose what lay beneath the ash. Slow and steady, digging through worthless ash until my brush hit something stamped deep into the steel. I scrubbed for 40 straight minutes. Look closely. When I stepped back, the true value stood revealed on that firewall. It was partially hidden, but obvious if you have the vision to spot a classic Aston Martin. There it was, the legendary chassis code DB4GT080LA. The ultimate build spec and number 0180. Only 19 of these Zagatos were ever built between 1960 and 1963. This specific number belonged to a legendary machine that had once been officially logged at a racing event in 1962, and vanished from every official registry since 1974. For 50 years, blind experts in the classic car world who supposedly cared assumed this masterpiece was completely destroyed or hidden so deep in a private collection it didn't matter. Nobody had the vision to think this lost treasure might be sitting right here in a Pennsylvania warehouse, masked by 50 years of neglect and 3 years of brutal fire damage, waiting for someone who actually knew how to spot true value. I called my mentor Elijah Cross at 11 that night. In Coventry, it was 4 in the morning. Elijah picked up immediately. I simply asked, "Do you remember chassis 0180? Dead silence stretched over the phone line, a silence that lasted long enough for me to check if we were still connected. Then I heard the old master take a slow, heavy breath. The sigh of someone finally dropping a heavy burden they carried for decades, whispering quietly, "God Almighty." The next 5 days were the ultimate high-stakes restoration work I lived for, a scale I had not tackled since leaving Newport Pagnell. I began grinding at 5 every morning, only stopping when my daughter Bonnie fell asleep in the corner, curled up on a little folding cot I set up. Her stuffed rabbit held tight, school homework finished right there on my messy workbench. My teardown was patient and precise. I was resurrecting a masterpiece. I was revealing this hidden treasure like an archaeologist, gently brushing away dirt, protecting its true worth. I relied on low-pressure compressed air and ultra-soft natural bristle brushes, along with a custom aluminum safe cleaner from England, treating every single drop of it like liquid gold. I absolutely refused cheap paint strippers or harsh acids that destroy historic value. Nothing would touch this metal that might ruin the priceless history etched into its bare bones. I worked with the intense focus I bring to every hidden gem that fools ignore. And when Logan showed up those mornings, he found the lights blazing, with me crouched beside this burnt $1 million masterpiece in the dim glow of a single lamp brushing away the soot in careful arcs no wider than my hand. Stick with me. Day by day, a multi-million-dollar legend slowly emerged from the ash. The rear quarters had been shielded from the worst of the fire by the heavy cabin structure. They emerged looking absolutely pristine, the bare aluminum completely intact and clean, the original factory hand dimpling completely visible. Those unmistakable Zagato curves on the rear haunches shone through the moment I wiped the soot away. The hood, however, presented a much tougher challenge. The fire had sparked directly underneath, focusing the blistering heat on that one crucial panel. But beneath those twisted, worthless panels lay the exact evidence I was looking for. I wasn't chasing a flawless body, I was chasing the truth. The ruined, melted engine block looked like total scrap, But a running motor isn't what proves this legendary supercar's real identity. On day 2, I carefully mapped that ruined block before tossing it away. Hidden deep inside a blackened crevice, I spotted 2 numbers etched in the metal. 8 and 0, the ultimate proof linking this wreck to chassis 0180. I quietly photographed every angle, keeping my massive discovery a secret from Logan. He was watching me. I calculated the numbers twice in my head, making absolutely sure the placement of those cast digits was flawless. It matched the Newport Pagnell registry for the DB4 GT perfectly. Day 3. Bringing old Elijah Cross into the loop changed the whole game. I showed him every inch of that metal. Elijah guided my search, with the laser focus of a master who knew exactly what details mattered. He had me check the passenger side door sill and carefully trace along the trailing edge. He directed me right to a hidden contour, a barely noticeable outward curve. It was so subtle that unless you knew its secret, you'd walk right past it. But unique enough that the original master who shaped it would recognize his own handiwork for the rest of his days. It served absolutely no structural or functional purpose. It only existed because the worker hammering that panel on a single afternoon in 1961 made a split-second, tiny physical adjustment with his hammer right at the end of his shift. A tiny accidental touch that ultimately became the permanent signature of a legendary masterpiece forever. Elijah fell completely silent. He stared at the screen and whispered, "I put that there." My thumb was raw and blistered that entire week from a grueling shift. I remember because it stung every time I gripped my hammer over the next 3 days. I asked him if he was completely sure. Elijah replied that at 69 years old, the memories in his own 2 hands were something he could never forget. By day 5, I finally cleaned off the firewall and uncovered the entire priceless chassis code. That same night, I put together a detailed report for Diana Ashworth, the top authority at the Aston Martin Heritage Trust in Newport Pagnell. I sent 47 high-resolution photos along with a precise breakdown of every measurement, including metallurgical analysis and every hidden secret I unearthed during 5 grueling days of work. I fired it off at 2:14 in the morning. Imagine that. I sat on the freezing garage floor looking past the char to the most historic Aston Martin. Left on Earth, I ate a quiet sandwich thinking about my father's legacy. But over the next 5 days, I had to sort through the legal mess. On day 6, a threatening letter arrived from the corporate attorneys representing Vane Prestige Auctions. Expensive letterhead, intimidating words, a typical legal scare tactic designed to bully me into giving up. Their basic argument was simple. They claimed the vehicle was sold strictly as is, with absolutely no guaranteed provenance. And if this scrap metal turned out to be a gold mine, instead of the worthless junk in their catalog, Vane Prestige desperately wanted to renegotiate. They realized they'd made a massive, costly mistake. They never openly accused me of fraud. They didn't have to. I read their panic twice and just smiled. You and I know how it goes. I threw that letter under my workbench and kept polishing aluminum. On day 8, another letter arrived, sent from an entirely different law firm representing Kellner, suddenly questioning what I had recognized during that auction. I read it once, then tossed it into the drawer with the first worthless paper. I kept quiet. Only Logan knew my secret, and he begged me to get a lawyer. I told him this burnt supercar was the only answer needed. Let the restoration do the talking. Because my vision was absolutely right. I paid that tiny $200 price under the exact same rules as those blind experts. I had no secret insider info. I just saw rare value where wealthy bidders saw junk. I recognized the fortune sitting right in front of anyone willing to actually look. By the time Diana Ashworth finally replied 6 days later, "Stay with me here, because this hidden treasure was already spinning way out of my control," Logan Pierce had been right beside me for most of the restoration work. The kid always had his phone camera out. I only tolerated it because the guy was irreplaceable. He posted a quick 6-second clip online with absolutely no caption. Just a raw shot of the car sitting under the halogen shop lights. That raw aluminum body glowing like gold. That legendary Zagato shape unmistakable to anyone who truly understands real value. He never named the Aston Martin. He did not say a single word. 6 hours later, it hit 2 million views, exploding across elite luxury car collector forums. 4 major Aston Martin experts figured it out, flooding my shop line with frantic, desperate voicemails. I did not return a single call. The buzz eventually reached auctioneer Charlotte Vane. A broker named Jason Webb called her desk asking, in a smooth, overly casual voice, if she was worried about how Lot 47 was handled. Charlotte insisted the auction was perfectly standard. She had zero concerns on her end. But the moment she hung up, she stared at that viral photo on her screen for a very long time. She kept Patrick Hollis's official assessment right there in her files. DB6, no recoverable value. She trusted that paper because she had trusted Patrick Hollis for 15 long years. She never bothered to visit that dusty Pennsylvania warehouse herself. She had 9 other high-end lots. A charred supercar just looked like worthless garage junk. The heavy silence she sat in after seeing that photograph was the quiet panic of an expert realizing exactly how badly they had failed. Adrian Kellner finally showed up at my shop on day 6. He was alone except for his driver in a black coat, moving with that smooth, effortless power of a man who had never faced a single problem that his fat bank account couldn't instantly sweep away. He stood inside my garage doors, staring at the resurrected supercar for 30 seconds. Long enough to see this was not the dismissive look he gave the junk in Hartford. This look was calculated, reluctant, respectful. Then he looked at me, offering $50,000. No questions asked, cash in hand today. You know the feeling of holding all the cards. I gripped my greasy rag. I stared him down and simply said, not for sale. Adrian Kellner pushed his bid to $100,000. I rejected it again. He only saw a cramped, dusty garage with a broken floor drain. Eyeing Bonnie's stuffed toy, he sneered that $100,000 was massive money for my small shop. I locked eyes with him, radiating the deep, quiet confidence of a visionary who sees a gold mine where others just see dirt. I reminded him how he previously stood near this rare salvage supercar and dismissed it as trash. I told him the historic asset was mine, the deal was closed, and he should leave. Adrian Kellner simply was not accustomed to being outsmarted by a humble mechanic who saw what he missed. But the blind suit saw the wall. Like you and I know, he realized my rejection was absolute. He retreated. On the stairs, my daughter Bonnie watched silently, holding her rabbit. She looked down and asked who that visitor was. I explained he was just someone who failed to look beneath the surface. She nodded, understanding that blind people always miss the greatest opportunities. By day 9, high-end specialist Diana Ashworth arrived, accompanied by 2 assistants, equipped with a portable spectrographic metal scanner and historic Aston Martin blueprints locked away in British archives since 1961. For over 4 grueling hours, she analyzed every detail. She stayed silent, only ordering me to hold my light at precise spots and verify hidden, priceless historical details. Meanwhile, her assistants documented every single inch. I sat calmly on a bucket, watching them discover the hidden treasure. Finally, Diana pulled off her gloves, straightened up, and stared directly at me. Her face held the shock of an expert who had just uncovered a multi-million-dollar fortune. She admitted she finally realized the true value of this wreck. She requested 48 hours to complete the certified historical authentication papers. She strictly warned me not to tell anyone about the find. I smiled, noting I had kept my golden secret safe. She agreed, saying my quiet discretion was why she flew straight to this garage. They packed up and left, leaving my small garage feeling completely silent again. My friend Logan, sitting frozen in the corner with his arms crossed the whole time, finally exhaled, completely stunned by the magnitude of the discovery. He whispered, "Mason," and I softly replied, "I know." Right then, Bonnie came downstairs carrying 2 hot cups of cheap cocoa. One for me and one for Logan. She placed them on my oily workbench, then ran back up to watch TV. Logan grabbed his mug, staring at the charred frame, shaking his head the way people naturally do when they suddenly realize they are standing right next to a multi-million-dollar masterpiece. Picture this. On morning 10, elite restorer Elijah Cross landed at the airport on a one-way flight from England, pushing a worn suitcase right through the busy arrivals terminal, with the slow, stubborn pace of a veteran mechanic in his late 60s who absolutely despised the chaotic noise of busy airports. I never invited this legendary British expert. No one did. He just booked a ticket after our call, showing up completely unannounced with a short text that read, "I am coming to see it. You and I know this drive." I watched him step through those glass doors and realized how the very artisan who shaped these legendary body panels 63 years ago had actually flown across the ocean on his own dime, uninvited because he knew its true worth. He refused to accept that his hand-built masterpiece, though charred and ignored as scrap, would be lost forever. Elijah gave me a handshake, the firm, no-nonsense grip of a classic old-school creator. He used both hands, gripping firmly, then instantly asked if the vital copper core was still intact. I told him yes. Elijah just replied with a quiet good. He grabbed his bag, and frankly, that was the only emotion we showed about our multi-million-dollar restoration project during the silent drive back to my Hartford garage. The elite auction expert Charlotte Vane arrived on the 13th day entirely alone, no assistants, no lawyers. Stripped of the arrogant corporate authority that usually hid her severe lack of vision, she quietly parked a basic, unassuming gray sedan right outside. She crept into my shop, lingering by the door, staring at the masterpiece in stunned silence. The raw, hidden aluminum body was fully exposed now, the priceless, legendary Zagato coachwork finally visible. That sleek, low roofline, the muscular rear haunches and the tight tail. The raw elegance of a hand-sculpted shell built purely for racing speed, overlooked by common eyes, but achieving absolute aesthetic perfection. Charlotte stared at this multi-million-dollar treasure with pure, agonizing regret. It wasn't just grief, but the crushing realization of throwing away a massive fortune because she only saw cheap scrap. She finally whispered that she had let this treasure go for $200. I simply nodded. She asked if we could negotiate a deal, but her voice trailed off. I told her no, the deal was done. She missed the value and now it was time to leave. She lingered there for another silent second. This so-called expert never learned humility, and her rigid pride was still visible in her tense, awkward posture. Yet there was a profound shift in the quality of her quiet stillness now. It was a complete contrast to the blind, smug arrogance she carried at that junk car auction. She finally turned away and walked back to her vehicle. My young daughter, Bonnie, watched from the corner. She quietly asked if the elegant lady was unhappy. I considered her innocent question and told her there is a vast difference between being unhappy and genuinely regretful, and this blind expert was definitely suffering from the second one. Bonnie processed my answer for a brief moment, then happily returned to her sketch. Diana Ashworth's official certification hit my inbox on the 11th day, proving my vision correct. The subject line read clearly, Aston Martin Heritage Trust Authentication Certificate. Let's look at this together. 4 pages containing the undeniable proof of scientific spectrographic analysis proving that the rare aluminum alloy and surface details match genuine Zagato craftsmanship, exactly as documented in 1961 production files. A precise comparison of the physical shop measurements with the original Newport Pagnell blueprints, showing exact matches within factory tolerances on all 37 measured points. An official statement from master builder Elijah Cross himself, confirming his direct, hands-on work in shaping these priceless panels. And a formal conclusion proving that this charred, forgotten shell was actually, look closely, the official certification paper used one single word. Pure gold, the legendary Aston Martin DB4. A masterpiece, chassis 0180 from 1961. Only 19 existed. The world blindly forgot it in 1974. But out of those 19, this was the absolute only one, whose hidden worth the blind experts declared completely lost. I read that paper twice, letting my coffee freeze, seeing my vision finally proven. I put down my phone and just sat in the quiet stillness of my cramped apartment for 20 minutes, remembering one special Saturday back in 1999. I was 12. My dad took my hand on that dusty shop floor. He pressed my palm against a curved aluminum panel, urging me to feel the true difference between cheap mass production and the priceless masterpieces that human hands craft. I recognized that magic back then, and I saw that potential in my shop 14 days ago, late at night under harsh lights, while Bonnie slept soundly nearby on her cot. Right then, I knew those two breakthrough moments were deeply connected. On the 14th morning, I finally reached out to Bonhams in London. I ignored the flashy auction houses and shut out those greedy luxury car brokers. I chose Bonhams because they recognized and sold the last real DB4 GT Zagato 12 years ago. They treated that masterpiece with the ultimate respect and precision that a restored treasure like this demands. The seasoned British agent I reached had already heard my name from Diana Ashworth, and he was fully prepared for my call. I immediately sent the Heritage Trust certificate and my complete restoration proof while we were still on the line. The luxury representative went completely quiet after viewing those files. Then he told me that strictly based on real market values for certified Zagatos in similar or even terrible condition, a modest opening auction bid would start at $8 million. And with collectors hungry for rare treasures, the final price would easily soar much higher. But you and I know I was never going to auction it. The baffled agent begged me to explain. I wanted a private sale. I demanded to know which serious institution was actively hunting for this exact automotive masterpiece. The broker named 3 major groups. I selected the third option, a private automotive museum located down in Scottsdale, Arizona. They spent 11 years chasing these legends, somehow securing 17 of the 19 ever created. I had one condition. Did they share these masterpieces publicly or hide them away in some dark vault? The broker assured me it was a completely public facility, open all year, hosting active educational programs for local high schools and trade colleges. I told him to arrange the deal. Their acquisition director booked a direct flight to Hartford that very same afternoon. He walked into my dusty workshop around 6:15 wearing a crisp pale linen jacket despite the freezing March cold and just silently paced around the masterpiece. Twice, he never touched it, just froze, staring at that rebuilt firewall for a long time. He truly understood fine craftsmanship. He recognized genuine artistry, quietly absorbing the impossible miracle parked right in front of him. He looked up. $10 million wired directly to my account within 72 hours. Think about that. The resurrected masterpiece heads to Scottsdale within 30 days. Stay with me. I had one ultimate condition for that museum director. I insisted the plaque next to this multi-million-dollar masterpiece must be prominent, permanently honoring the master craftsman who literally shaped its raw aluminum. Elijah Cross, Newport Pagnell, 1961. The director studied my face for a moment, then simply nodded, of course. I firmly shook his hand. Logan had been quietly leaning against the wall with his arms crossed throughout the negotiation, finally exhaling in relief, staring down at the concrete. The museum director stepped out to call headquarters. Logan just stared at me, opening his mouth to speak before quickly shutting it again. He offered a slow nod, honestly the only real response he could even muster. We officially signed that massive contract the next morning. Elijah Cross had been sleeping upstairs above my garage on a tiny canvas cot, right beside Bonnie's bookshelf for 3 days. He stood up slowly when I told him. He walked over to our restored masterpiece, placing both hands flat against that gleaming metal. His hands trembled slightly, a physical toll built up over the last few decades. 40 years of relentless hammerwork always leaves its own permanent signature on a craftsman's body. He pressed his palms against the salvaged aluminum he first shaped 63 years ago, closing his eyes in silence. When he opened them, he whispered that his creation was finally going where people would actually respect its true, timeless value. Bonnie stood right beside him, gently taking his weathered hand the way she always held onto. Anyone carrying a heavy emotional burden, she just held on in complete silence. Elijah looked at her, then back at his resurrected treasure, saying, "The things we build with our hands never truly die. They just wait for someone to see their true value again." I stood across the quiet garage and just listened in silence, because you cannot add a single word to that truth. Elijah Cross flew back home to Coventry 4 days later. I drove the legendary craftsman to the airport. At the gate, the old master paused, looked back, and told me I was exactly like my late father. Then he walked through the busy security checkpoint, and I watched until he was no longer in sight. Then I drove back to my quiet workshop on the south end of town and unlocked the door, flicked on the halogens, and stood in the empty bay where a $200 wreck became a masterpiece. The concrete floor still held the ghost of its presence. a patch of shop floor slightly cleaner than the surrounding greasy concrete, a faint dusting of silver aluminum shavings near the floor drain, a few precise scuff marks where our rolling dolly pressed into the sealant. You might wonder about Logan. He deleted that video within 3 days, claiming the cheap attention had served its temporary purpose. As for Charlotte Vane, over the following weeks, completely terminated her shady arrangement with Patrick Hollis and issued a strict directive requiring all auction cars to be inspected in person before finalizing their true descriptions. She did this without any public announcement, completely refusing to mention the miracle restoration in our garage that forced her hand. And as for Adrian Kellner, total radio silence. That fancy auction expert hates admitting when his eyes fail him. But trust me, failing to see the hidden fortune in this charred classic was the most expensive mistake of his life. He stood just 3 feet from chassis 0180. He stared at the burnt metal for 30 seconds, saw only trash, and walked away. Picture this. 3 weeks after that multi-million-dollar windfall, my modest South Hartford garage looked completely unchanged. I still wore my dirty flannel shirt. I kept taking the exact same jobs. Squeaking brakes, oil changes, and the odd vintage restoration. That was the steady work keeping my doors open since day one. I finally hired a full-time mechanic. Logan had spent 3 years bouncing between 2 local garages. It was time we gave him a real permanent place to build his future. I finally paid off the rest of that heavy equipment loan from my shop's tough second year. I also funded a small automotive scholarship at Hartford Technical College, named after my late wife, helping blue-collar kids learn the art of seeing value in old, forgotten machinery. When wealthy Elijah Cross returned my donation with a letter telling me to save that money for my daughter's college, I slipped his note into the old wooden box where my dad's old letters lived. I moved the cash to her college fund and never felt the need to explain myself to anyone. Late one Friday night, Bonnie and I had dinner at our tiny table directly over the garage. Her pet rabbit occupied the 4th chair, just like always. She asked where that burnt supercar ended up. I said it was in Arizona, resting in a bright showroom where people gather just to admire its beauty. She looked up and asked if it was happy. I imagined Elijah polishing that sleek aluminum, remembering a quiet Saturday morning back in 1999. And that cheap envelope holding $200 of discarded metal. I smiled and said, "Yeah, it definitely is." That priceless masterpiece had waited decades for someone to recognize its true worth, and now it was home. Bonnie chewed on that for a second, then kept eating. Eventually, she looked up and asked how I knew to buy what everyone else called junk. I told her I saw the golden soul beneath the ash, while the experts saw only trash. She asked why I bothered looking when nobody else did. You know, I set my fork down and really thought. That's the kind of question that deserves a lot more than a quick, lazy answer. Then I told her if you do not look for the gold, it stays buried forever. After we finished eating, I went back down to the quiet garage. I flicked on the bright halogen work lights out of habit, even though no rare legendary machine sat under their glow waiting for me to find its value. Just a 1989 Toyota pickup truck, waiting for a fresh belt, next to torn-apart carburetor pieces resting neatly on a clean shop rag. I stood right in the center of the empty bay, where chassis 0180 once rested, and I just stared at the empty space for a few long minutes. Believe me, I marvel at the wild reality of it all, not the money but the invisible value. $200 on a Monday morning, turning into $10 million just 2 weeks later when an Arizona buyer recognized its worth without a second thought. And the vast, invisible gap in between bridged by nothing but sweat, grit, and specialized expertise. Plus the relentless, sharp focus on hidden details that most of the snobs in that Hartford luxury auction room had trained themselves to ignore, stepping right past a treasure because it looked like dirty scrap metal. I never saw only the obvious. To me, this wasn't an underdog story. It was about finding the hidden fortune most people missed. I looked past the damage, focusing on the value of shaped aluminum. My father taught me how to recognize true, hidden craftsmanship in raw materials. And Bonnie's words from the back seat, reminding me that true value is always worth seeking. Maybe garbage or maybe pure gold. I turned off the workshop lights, securing our hidden treasure. I walked upstairs, leaving the unrecognized fortune resting in silence. 72 wealthy buyers crowded the auction that March. All they saw was a worthless burnt shell. None of them saw the real asset. You and I know this isn't about luck but having vision. It is a masterclass in pausing, analyzing, and discovering what others choose to ignore, and asking questions everyone else ignores. Never walking past a discarded relic just because the blind crowd missed the multi-million-dollar masterpiece buried underneath. Elijah Cross' hand shaped it. He hammered that aluminum in 1961, stamping his genius directly into the metal. An invisible signature that 63 years and a devastating fire could never erase. I was a 29-year-old mechanic trained to spot hidden assets, thanks to my father. Thanks to years of hard labor and learning to notice what others overlooked. Seeing priceless treasures in the broken pieces that the rich elite threw away. I had the vision, $200, 14 days, and $10 million in unlocked wealth. It all boiled down to a single question asked while examining that dusty, unrecognized asset. What is this asset's true potential? Success follows when we look closer.